Good morning, everybody. How are you? Welcome to Beyond the Flight Deck, the evolution of aviation education. This panel is about reimagining how we prepare the next generation of aviation professionals, not just teaching them to fly or maintain aircraft, but equipping them to lead, to innovate, and to thrive in a rapidly changing technology driven industry. My name is Cathyrine Armandie, and I'll be your moderator today. I spent 20 years as a combat aviator in the United States Air Force. During that time, I also helped shape diversity and inclusion policy to better prepare the next generation of leaders. Today, I host Lies My Ego Told Me, a podcast where I have open and honest conversations about leadership, growth, and self awareness. Aviation has given me both a career and a calling, and I'm honored to bring that passion into today's discussion. Today, we're joined by three remarkable leaders: Dr. Suzanne Kearns, professor of aviation and founding director of the Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Aeronautics. She's an internationally recognized scholar on human factors, training, and aviation education, and advises the International Civil Aviation Organization on the next generation of aviation professional initiative. She champions integrating leadership, safety, and sustainability into aviation training. We also have with us Vanesa Miksa, human factors engineer at Boeing on the future flight deck team, and a licensed pilot and instructor. With her human factors master from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and her flight training, she combines firsthand flight deck experience with engineering expertise to design safer, more intuitive flight systems. And she is passionate about advancing inclusive approaches to aviation training and technology. Lastly, we have Lisa Nguyen. Lisa is the principal airport transportation planner at Denver International Airport, one of the busiest hubs in the United States. She leads long-term planning and mobility strategies, balancing passenger experience, growth, and sustainability. With a background in civil and transportation engineering, Lisa specializes in bridging design, planning, and operations to reimagine how people move safely and efficiently through complex aviation spaces. She also serves in leadership roles with ITE, WTS, and SACE, advocating for inclusive mobility and greater representation in aviation and STEM. Thank you all for being here.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
For how aviation education is evolving, how to integrate diversity, equity, and leadership into technical training, the role of partnerships between academia and industry, and how emerging technologies like AI are reshaping what and how we teach. So, my first question is to all of you. Aviation education has traditionally focused on technical mastery, learning to fly, maintain, or operate within our industry. But as we evolve to prepare the next generation of aviation professionals, we're recognizing that leadership, innovation, and adaptability are equally critical. So, to start us off, could each of you share a defining moment in your career or education when you realized that aviation training needed to evolve and that it requires more than just technical skill? So we'll start with Suzanne.
Sure. So I've had the pleasure of teaching thousands of aviation students over my 20-year career as a professor, and I think what's true with everyone is that there's a spark that's ignited. I always say people don't get into aviation by accident. They get into it because they have an experience, and it sort of ignites this passion. Nobody gets into it accidentally, and yet so many, when you look at the career progression of young people, that there's a big disconnect in that I would say approximately 25 to 30% of my students are women, and yet when we see the transition into the workforce of pilots, it's still only about 5 or 6% women, and it's been true in that sense for quite a long time. So I have the real privilege of working with a team of human factors researchers at the university. There's about a dozen of us that come from all different disciplines, from cognitive psychology to systems engineering to neuroscience, vision science, and we work together regularly. And one of the challenges that was brought forward by some of my colleagues, which I think was really eye-opening to me, is there a possibility that because the majority of the workforce comes from a certain demographic, that many of the licensing practices and assessment practices favor that demographic's learning and assessment styles? So there's been a thrust of research where we're using different kinds of biometric sensors, so everything from eye trackers to other devices, and putting pilots into simulated challenging situations and tracking differences in responses. And what we're seeing, so the most emerging data we're seeing right now is that while men and women come to the same outcome of competency, that the path that they get there, there are different strengths and challenges depending on the background of those individuals. So in some areas, women are outperforming, in other areas, men are outperforming. And so it's this really interesting dynamic question of this idea that as we shift from traditional training to more competency-based training, as we have newer technologies that let us think more specifically about that individual's need and how a training and assessment system can support their individual path to competency, that maybe there's an ability to retain a more diverse workforce and to help people who maybe come from different areas that the traditional training pathway isn't as well aligned to suit their success.
That's really interesting. That definitely translates to training in the flight deck. So over to you, Vanessa. What about your experience?
Yeah, so just to kind of really add on to that, just as a pilot, it's not just technical skills, right? That's one thing
Mhm.
we learned and we had the checklist and all that. But then I realized kind of defining moment is really decision making and leadership. Like you need to be ready to take that like hard and fast, especially because, well, now I'm not in training anymore. I'm the only person on this airplane and I'm making that decision. Am I going to go or not go? Am I making? And that's so hard to sometimes
Mhm.
train. And even us as women, we are culturally not really the leaders in our families or something like that. So kind of getting in that mindset to really be the leader, to make the decisions, and to even make them confidently. A lot of times I
Mhm.
feel like even myself, I'm like the only one on the airplane. I'm like, well, am I going to go straight? There's a thunderstorm. Am I going to come back? Or, what do I do? Am I going to go land? So many options, but how do you even train somebody to make a decision when you're kind of uncertain about that decision, or even just you don't even know what's going on behind you? So to me, kind of those moments were like, wow, it's not just a checklist, which I initially thought I'm just going to walk into this flight deck and I don't have to talk to anybody except my co-pilot. But then I realized there's so much talk going on, especially that crew human factors stuff going on. So yeah, yep.
Thank you. And what about you, Lisa?
Great. Thanks, Catherine. Good morning. I had a colleague who recently said this, and it really kind of stuck with me. The way that she described it is that she stumbled into aviation. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong for a lot of folks who perhaps don't have a traditional aviation path. I'll explain. So for me, my elevator pitch is as a civil engineer and transportation engineer background. I'm at the airport helping all forms of transportation aside from things that actually fly in the aircraft. So we're looking at the roads, we're looking at trains, buses, cars, how people move. I think for me, part of it is the perspective of understanding how broad aviation is beyond our traditional, what we think of as just planes, crew, grounds people. And it really is so dynamic. I will say one of the big aha moments for me is being able to actually work with our interns at Denver International Airport. I will say one of the really cool things that we got to do this summer was actually bring on some high school students, which is incredible. I don't know about you, but when I was in high school, I had no clue what I was going to do for lunch, let alone my career. And it's really inspiring to kind of get a chance to expose young people to the environment. What does urban planning mean in the sense of an airport? What does BT business technologies mean in the sense of an airport? So that's been really refreshing. I think being able to help expose more
Mhm.
folks to different career paths and what aviation is more broadly has definitely been really helpful.
And aviation is such a huge ecosystem. Like you said, there's a lot of focus on airplanes and pilots, and that's the cool, fun, like Hollywood part of it. But, the amount of support, especially in what you do, that it takes to be able to enable that, there are just so many professions that I think young people aren't even aware of that they would be equally excited about. So I'm so glad that we have such a breadth of experience on this panel. So I'm going to get into one of our core conference questions. So I'm going to start with Suzanne, but feel free to jump in if you have any input. How can aviation education better integrate diversity, equity, and leadership into the technical training? We touched on this a little bit already, but rather than treating them as separate courses or add-ons, how do we weave them together into the fabric of how we prepare aviation professionals across the board? So we'll start with you, Suzanne.
Sure. Yeah, and I really appreciate the points that Lisa and Vanessa brought up. And I'll just share with you that I grew up as a pilot. I started flying when I was 15, flew airplanes and helicopters. And then through all of my education, I was the only girl in almost every classroom that I was a part of. And then as I moved into the academic world, and I was formerly president of the University Aviation Association, which is sort of an elected role that represents aviation academics. And I remember when one of the first meetings I had is as president, someone walked up to me and they said, "Oh, we have a girl president this year." I'm like, "Oh, maybe I earned it, and maybe it's based on my credentials." But I think for me, that's kind of the big goal, is that I don't want to be recognized as the token girl in the room. I want to be recognized for having earned my place, and I think that's the big challenge that I have when people think about DEI, which is, there's a lot of challenging discourse around that term, specifically when it's relating to women in aviation.
Mhm.
My perspective is, I know that any aviation professional has to meet the standards for licensing and recurrent training. And I can share from my personal journey, when you stand out and you're the only one of a certain group in the room, in my experience, you don't have an easier path. You have to earn your place, and you have to show that you've deserved to be there. So when you see discourse publicly where people are shaming or criticizing more experienced female aviation professionals, it's heartbreaking because how
Mhm.
hard they had to work to get there. So how do we fix this? It's an age-old question. I think all of us can take small actions in our own lives to support and mentor and encourage other people, so that no matter who you are, what your background is, you know that you can have a place in this industry. But I just want to pick up on Lisa's comment, is that I wrote a textbook called Fundamentals of International Aviation, and the purpose of that book is really directly aligned with what Lisa said, is that I had been teaching so many student pilots who couldn't proceed in their education because of finances or other challenges or barriers that they faced. And I know that internationally, ICAO has said aviation, like recruiting aviation professionals, is a global priority, that we need a lot of people in our industry. And I kept seeing these young, passionate people who love aviation leaving the aviation industry. And I was thinking, like, gosh, they just don't understand the diversity of job opportunities in all different areas. If you lose your medical, or you can't afford training, like there's so many pathways. And so the purpose of that book was really to expose them to sort of the breadth of careers in aviation, and to give them that foundation. So really to start aviation education with this broad cross section of, here's all the pieces of the industry and how they fit together. So that's been a real passion of mine as well. But it's one of those things that it's a challenge everybody's aware of. We don't have one solution, and ultimately I think it comes down to what we can do, small actions in our own lives to support the people around us.
And Vanessa?
Um, yeah, it's really the little things you can do. And it really comes from us individually. Like one thing that I really love to do is really going in the community, my own community here in Florida and in the US, and really spreading the word. And yeah, it's not just being a pilot. Pilot is the one that everybody sees and it's
Mhm.
obvious and they know what that means. But then, just for example, I tell people I'm a human factors engineer. Almost without a mistake, they think I'm human resources. And yeah, and it's interesting because it didn't hit me until like maybe like a year ago. I'm like, oh, I really need to explain. And just another example, like I told one of my student pilots, I was like, yeah, I'm a human factors engineer at Boeing. This was like a month ago maybe. And just yesterday he said like, oh yeah, you do human resources. That's not engineering, right? And I'm like, okay. Now I have to go back and explain. But even that little step of me explaining to them, hey, no,
Mhm.
there's other jobs in aviation. It's not just being a
Right.
pilot, right? You have to explain there's human factors. Well, what is that? Well, if you go to our book, the first chapter says human factors on it, and you learn about these, the five P's, the three P's, or whatever. Well, you can actually be an engineer on that. So I feel like
Mhm.
making those little steps, like it is introducing not even the next generation, but also everybody else. Because
Mhm.
just an example, human factors is pretty new to the world.
Yeah.
So really explaining that, what it is, like, the human, the systems, how they interact and all that, it's really like a different perspective. So I feel like doing these little things really helps. Also, as we know, Girls in Aviation Day is coming up on Saturday is that big Women in Aviation International event around the world.
Yep.
Massive way to spread the word and really show it. One thing we're doing at the event in Daytona Beach, so I'm one of the presidents here, is really showcasing engineering, maybe even more than being a pilot.
Yeah.
So more that science part, more the engineering, more anything else almost except being a pilot, because that one they're very obvious. But all the other careers, they just don't know, like business and aviation. That's just not even a big thing that people think about. They didn't even know there's
Hmm.
college for that. So I thought like really kind of spreading that word in these other parts of aviation really, really helps.
Yeah. And both of you have brought up a thought that kind of spurred something from my own experience where it even comes down to as simply as engineering aircraft to be more inclusive of the recruitable population. So many of our legacy aircraft really fit, you know, full grown men and they don't necessarily fit women. And I know in the Air Force, we had a huge problem of not being able to recruit women that were the average height because our systems simply weren't equipped for them. And that is something that the procurement and the process has changed to make sure that the aircraft themselves are actually physically more inclusive.
Yeah, anthropometry. Yeah, sorry to jump in, but it's so true,
No,
and
that's
it
great.
harks back to what I mentioned at the beginning. Is there's this unconscious, establishment of the aviation system that's based on the demographics that represented all pilots at that time. And so
Mhm,
anthropometry being the physical measurements of the human
mhm,
body, it's not just something that could exclude women who tend to be shorter in stature, but also different ethnic backgrounds, like the
mhm.
seated heights and versus the lengths of arms and legs are different between different ethnicities. So it's
Exactly.
it's an interesting. You can understand historically how it happened, but it's one of those sort of unconscious things that can reinforce to people this industry doesn't fit you, right, and you don't fit it. And so it's one of those things, like, again, not just cognitive like we talked about before, but yeah, physical body dimensions.
Mhm.
Yeah, and just
And
to
Lisa,
add that, I do want to
mhm.
say that I see a lot of women not giving up when they don't fit in the airplane. So I see all these women and girls with their pillows, like they're going in their
Yes.
172 or Diamond or whatever they're flying around, and they're just not giving up.
Yeah.
They're doing everything. So I'm just kind of really happy to see that, and even more encourage it even more, right? Because it's like, wow, there's something physically stopping you from controlling this
Mhm.
airplane, and yet here we are, we're doing it.
And Lisa, is that something that you've seen on the operational side? Are there barriers that, were invisible that are really coming to light?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, when I look at the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion in our industry, one of the first big pieces is kind of recognizing what our own privileges are, but also maybe
Mhm.
what some of those potentially implicit biases might be, understanding. Other folks' situation may not necessarily be the same as yours. For me personally, as a child of immigrants from the Vietnam War and a person of color, I was a first generation college student in my family. So for me, I did not have the privilege of understanding having parents that are formally educated with college degrees. They
Mm.
worked and owned Chinese restaurants. So for me, that was what I was grown up with. And it was really eye opening for me when I started going to college and recognizing a lot of my peers and classmates were maybe inspired by a family member or someone else who'd already been in a professional setting. So part of that is recognizing those where everyone's coming from, but also recognizing where you might be right now and what your privileges might be and how you can hopefully help empower and uplift others. So I think that's really helpful. And I will say, I really appreciate this discussion about some of those invisible barriers. One of my favorite books that I've read about how our world is designed, a lot of those transportation aspects, is Invisible Women. So, highly recommend that as a read if folks are looking for something.
It's on my list now. Great. I love that. So we'll switch gears a little bit. So, Vanessa, from your perspective, designing future flight systems and training pilots, how do we prepare aviation professionals who can lead diverse teams and make decisions that consider multiple perspectives? And how does this show up in actual cockpit operations or engineering teams?
Yeah, I mean more inclusivity, right? Like from an engineer perspective, I really it's bringing not just a team of the same people, like not just the human factors people building this, right? But really inclusivity, bringing the systems engineer, the pilot, the maintenance people, right? Like we always
Mhm.
forget about those people that are actually fixing these airplanes because they can really tell us, what's going on. Not only
Mhm.
that, we do have the pilot flying the airplane, but then we also have the customers, right? The airliner, they're buying it and they're like, oh, we see all these pilots saying this and this and this, or all of our maintenance saying this and this. So really kind of bringing that in and getting everybody together to build a better future for aviation, not just the airplane, but really everything, right? So I
Mhm.
think that's one thing. In the flight deck, one thing that I'm seeing is a lot of automation in the flight deck, right?
Right.
It's just going on. But then we have to also train the next generation to be really good at that.
Mhm.
Sometimes there are a little bit of setbacks. What are the setbacks in training? A lot of times people cannot afford to fly the brand new Cirrus or Diamond aircraft that has all the automation in it, right? It's
Mhm.
like press, push to start, and that whole fun stuff. The Garmin, the autopilot, the auto landing now, right? You have to train people to do that, and then you also have to see how does that human react when the automation does whatever it's doing. Like how do we
Mhm.
balance those two people, right? Like well, the person and the system, right? How do
Mhm.
they work together? So for me, like trying to figure that out is probably what the future looks like. It's not anymore just flying it, right? Because they can all fly
Right.
it. They went through the check rides, they've done it, we know that. But then I feel like even automation is not tested to the max right now doing
Mhm.
their new check rides. It's really just like, show me this maneuver, right? Bring me here, do this, right? It's not like, well, if the automation fails, what exactly we're doing. And what are we doing when we don't even know what's going on? How do we make a decision when we do not know what's going on? And I feel like
Mhm.
that's when we really want to train the new generation to start really thinking about that. Yeah.
Right. I think, and we're a lot of people from my generation, well, because I'm aging myself, we didn't start with the automation and then we had to start integrating it. I mean, really it's almost like having an additional crew member in the cockpit. And that I'm sure has changed fundamentally how
Yeah.
you've looked at like crew resource management, for example.
Yeah, I mean, it makes this so much easier just having, for example, flight. I mean, I don't know
Mm,
whether if there's something I really cannot do with just flight having it in my flight deck. I really just don't even need the second pilot. I can pretty much do it all.
mhm.
But that's new, right? Like all the new integrated technology, even in that flight app. Like, okay, we can shoot approaches. It's telling me details in the approach that I, as a human, might have missed. Like I might have
Mhm.
missed some like don't do this, right? You cannot make this turn, or you have to stop here at this decision altitude, or stop before that, right? It's just something that maybe the other crew member could have caught, but now you have this automation catching these little things. So I'm like, oh well, this is kind of cool. Like I can shoot this whole approach. I know exactly. I can see it in 3D as well. I know where I'm
Mhm.
going. Um, that's like just like different. And this technology only came in like what, maybe like 4 years ago. Some of it, like the
Mhm.
3D view of your whole flight plan, came in maybe
Right.
like 3 years ago. Right? This is even new for me. And it just gets even more automated from there. Like my students, they don't even have logbooks anymore. I click on my app and it assigns
Mhm.
endorsements and assigns everything. So that's how advanced we are. Even I can't realize how advanced we are sometimes. I feel like, well, I trained 5 years ago, and I feel like I'm already old, but this
Mhm.
is like a whole new world now coming up.
Yeah, and technology, I think, is really highlighted when we talk about diversity, the generational diversity that exists in
Yeah.
the aviation industry, because it is a huge gap. So that kind of leads me to my question for Lisa. In your experience with airport planning and transportation systems, where do you see the biggest gaps in how we're preparing professionals to think beyond their specific technical roles? How can education better prepare people to innovate across the entire aviation ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I tend to approach it that learning is a lifelong journey, right? It's not just your formalized training and formalized classes and school, but it is much, much more, right? Very similar to what Vanessa was saying. As things are changing and evolving as an industry, we too need to be able to change and evolve what we're doing, what we are comfortable with, what might not feel as the normal. I'll use an example about being able to better utilize AI technology and those tools in our day-to-day life. I joke about this, but when I was growing up and before we used to write reports by hand in paper. And I do remember when Wikipedia first came out, how everyone was very nervous and they felt this was taboo. But
Right.
now it's become such a day-to-day part in our lives, right? How often do you hop on the internet and use a search engine? You're checking a term, you're checking something, and Wikipedia ends up being that resource for you to start from. So I think it's being able to get ourselves to be flexible, being able to see things, sniff things out, but also just constantly being in that learner mindset.
Mhm. And that's a wonderful segue to this next question, which is for all of you. So, our second core conference question is: what role do partnerships play between academia and industry in creating more inclusive future pipelines? So, let's start with what's working. Can you share some examples of collaborations that are genuinely preparing diverse professionals to lead and innovate to lead and innovate in aviation? That's a tongue twister for us. So, we'll start with Suzanne.
Sure. Yeah, so I can share with you a little bit about WISA, the institute that I founded and lead. So when the pandemic hit, what became really clear is, of course, our industry suffered. I think everybody in the sector,
Mhm.
particularly young student pilots, carrying massive debt loads and having no, viable path to move forward. And that was really one of the impetus to form WISA, which is a research and educational institute that looks at prioritizing sustainability. But sustainability doesn't mean what most people think it means. Like most people think of sustainability in terms of environmental impact, which is a
Yeah.
critical pillar, but it's also about the people and it's also about the economic viability of operation. So it's really this combination of people, profit, and planet with this focus on long-term viability. So more than anything, sustainability is about future-focused decision making. And so
Mhm.
under that, workforce sustainability is a critical pillar of this question. So a lot of our discussion today around EDI, like frankly, if we're only appealing to half of the demographics of society, we're always going to have workforce challenges, not just in
Mhm.
attracting, but in retaining. If people aren't having, viable careers that are giving them pathways, if say example they have a child or they they encounter different challenges in life, that retention of talent is going to be a critical issue, as well as human factors and how we optimize training. So when you think about your question around the partnerships, I think
Mhm.
the challenge is that academia sometimes is seen as separate from
Mhm.
the world. And that's a real challenge because there's a tremendous amount of both education, of research outputs, technology, laboratories, and resources that exist in the academic world. So one of the missions of WISA was to try to be a bridge, to have one side in the industry and government realms, really understanding like what are the big challenges that you're facing, but maybe as a business, you don't have the resources or the time or the interest or capabilities to invest the money that would need to answer a certain question. And then on the other side, in the academic world, so talking to researchers and laboratories and saying like, hey, did you know that this research question that you're interested in actually has a practical, viable application with an industry partner? So through
Mhm.
WISA, we've had many really strong partnerships with industry. We've facilitated more than 50 direct research collaborations between industry and academia. And so that's, I think, one of the key goals that we hope we can facilitate is really like catalyzing that academic community to be in service to industry and mobilizing that talent to answer questions that are most important. And if we don't do that, it's such a loss because historically I think the different sectors don't communicate as well as they could, and if we all work together, it's a shared future that we're all going to be in. So working together collaboratively across sectors is really critical.
And Vanessa?
Yeah, so pretty much from an instructor perspective, I think that partnership between the flight schools and the airliners can really help
Mhm.
kind of really bridge that gap. Well, not so much, but definitely bridge it somehow. And again, when we go to flight schools, not every flight school has a diversity in like their students, right? As we know, it's probably mostly male. However, a lot of the 141 schools that I see now in Florida, there's quite a lot of women now. The last like maybe again 2 3 years, like I've seen classes with 3 4 girls in the ground school, in the private pilot, the instructor, and all that. I've seen a lot of female instructors. So I'm happy to see like all this going on, and also having this partnership gives the women opportunity to for the airlines to see them, and
Mhm.
hopefully, based on the skills and everything, like actually hire them. So that's kind of one thing that I see is good. Another one is getting those scholarships out. It's so hard for somebody to become a pilot. It's
Mhm.
even hard for somebody to go to, for example, Embry-Riddle, right? It's a private college. It's so hard to it's easy to probably get in. It's just like who's going to pay that, right? To be one
Mhm.
of the top engineers and to be one of the, if not the top pilot in the world, right? It's so hard. So we're really kind of trying to expose all these scholarships and how to take it about, right? What is the first step? Can I go to Riddle? No. Okay. Where else can I go, right? And I've seen this. I had a student who was 16 years old, wanted to go to the Air Force. However, because of her background, she only had her mother. I think she was a cleaning lady, couldn't really do it. I unfortunately wasn't able to help her so much as an instructor. I did a lot of like free orals and all that, but at some point when she had to go to the airplane, there was nothing I can do there, right? There's a
Mhm.
timestamp on the airplane, and I just could not. I felt like I reached a limit in helping her. I gave her
Mhm.
all the scholarships. It's just like I reached a limit. So one kind of thing to do is like how do we pass that limit? How do we make it
Mhm.
better? How do we give it more accessible to all these women who have the talent and the skills but cannot reach our aviation industry almost no matter what. Like, how do we do
Mhm.
that, right? So to me, that's kind of one lurking thought that I always have going on.
Yeah,
Can
I'm
I
very. Oh,
could
sorry,
I
go ahead.
could I
Mhm.
jump in and respond?
Sure.
I just want to add, I think that that's such an important point that, we think about EDI in terms of gender, but the reality is the economic disparity is a critical barrier for everyone. And I've seen so many passionate young pilots, young men, young women, all different backgrounds who are really suffering because of the tremendous costs to get in. The price to
Mhm.
get in the door is critical. And yeah, I think that what a good point, Vanessa, like partnerships, like these pipelines that go from schools into jobs and subsidized education to help support young people. I think that's absolutely essential.
Mhm.
Mm.
And Lisa kind of touched on it a little bit, as being, the child of immigrants, the ability to get the access, the ability to understand how to get to those points, is a massive barrier, because even applying to college, if you didn't have parents that understand that process, it can be challenging. If you don't have people who are familiar with that industry, like you said, that is incredibly expensive to get trained in, it is another huge barrier. So over to you, Lisa, to close out this question.
Yeah, no, great. I love the thoughts that Suzanne and Vanessa have both shared. I agree. It is a challenging issue, but I like to see it as, the iceberg. We start working at it and picking at it slow by slow. Some of the things that I've seen that have been really effective, aside from an internship program, could be as simple as providing tours, job shadowing. We try to partner with a lot of youth organizations to expose students and young people to what else is there out here, taking them out on the airfield, bringing them through
Mhm.
our operations center, taking them to our emergency operations center so they can kind of see what that entails. And I think some of that is a big aha moment. Some other things that we've worked on is partnering with some of the local schools, both the high schools and colleges in our area. If there's an opportunity and it makes sense, we've been very excited to work with some of our local schools to do capstone projects, or trying to be an institutional advisor for students on things. This can be really fun as well too, because you can start to rope in some of the larger, broader issues like mega trends, eVTOL, sustainable aviation fluid, all these kind of things that may be just a little bit past my day to day work, but is something that we certainly want to be able to study and understand. So, being able to kind of tap into those minds, I think, is also really helpful, getting them inspired.
And a follow up to what you just talked about, Lisa, how can these academic and industry partnerships better prepare professionals to think systemically, to see aviation as part of that broader mobility ecosystem and community impact? What are those pitfalls that we need to avoid?
Ooh, that is a good question. I don't have a direct answer on
Mhm.
specific pitfalls, but I think it's part of that broader continuity and exposure. One thing I'll mention is that for me personally, when I was going through school as a civil engineer, it was exposure to certain industries, right? It was structures,
Mhm.
water. At my particular institution, there wasn't transportation, let alone even
Mhm.
within transportation, no aviation. So part of that
Mhm.
is kind of providing that exposure. I know this is definitely kind of stepping out a little farther on a limb, but I have met several folks in my industry who've really, really given back by trying to volunteer and be um, faculty at schools and trying to
Okay.
teach maybe a course or something small. At a smaller scale, maybe it is reaching out to student groups, whether it's
Mhm.
maybe the American Society of Civil Engineers or AAAE, and really trying to interact with some of those student groups as well too, to be, whether it's being a speaker at an event or bringing them out for a tour. All those
Mhm.
different touch points do add up.
And I don't know that it's necessarily a pitfall, but definitely a challenge is that, we can inspire all these young people to get into this profession, but without the true mentorship, without the reach back from people that are succeeding, it is incredibly challenging to continue to get those kids to get to the next stepping stone. Because, like we said, there are just access challenges, economic challenges. Yeah, I do think we have to train our replacements. It's very, very important. So back to you, Suzanne, and we're talking about partnerships still. What makes the difference between partnerships that just provide internship placements versus those that fundamentally reshape how we prepare aviation professionals for those leadership roles?
Yeah, it's a great question. Everything that sort of I mentioned previously around facilitating research collaborations, I think the goal is co-development, right? It's
Mhm.
this iterative circular process where someone would say, "Hey, I think I want to research this," and industry says, "Well, actually, we kind of have a question over here," and they're like, "Okay, well, let's shift a little bit and cycle." So I think establishing those mechanisms for communication is critical. And to
Mhm.
pick up on your question to Lisa previously,
Mhm.
for me, it's been a real passion to think about how we make aviation education as accessible as possible, and recognizing that as the needs of society change, and Vanessa, you touched on this as well, like technology is evolving, the challenges are evolving. I can tell you, I went to Embry-Riddle for my bachelor's and my master's, and climate change and the environmental sustainability pieces weren't even in the curriculum. And so now that I'm in a sustainability institute, one of our goals has been to create professional development upskilling, because I recognize, like, everybody my generation and above are
Mhm.
leaders who are working in the field, who are managing day-to-day challenges, and yet some of the society's, like, the most focused issues are things that weren't taught to us when when we went to school. So we're trying to learn about it while we're working at the same time. So it's a challenge for us as well, because when you think about reaching back and attracting the next generation, it
Mhm.
matters a lot to the next generation that they see us doing things that are responsible and sustainable and promote long-term viability. It just makes
Mhm.
sense. Like, if I'm 20 years old and I want to join a career where I know I've got 40 years, a full career ahead of me, I want to see the people who are leading in that space prioritizing and recognizing and understanding the decisions that are made today need to be considering what happens 20, 30, 40 years from now. So that, I think, is again where partnerships are the only way we can do that. That we have to recognize that creating the sustainable future is a jigsaw puzzle, and each of us is one
Mhm.
piece of that puzzle. And it's only by sort of building that puzzle out through collaborations that we can really move forward together.
Mhm. And so we're going to switch gears a little bit here, but we briefly touched on technologies being kind of a new crew member. So we see this rapid rise in technologies such as AI, VR, AR. So as we reimagine how we prepare aviation professionals using those technologies and adaptive systems, and how we train for it, from your work in future flight systems and academia and in from operations, how should aviation education evolve to prepare our future professionals who can lead and innovate with these technologies rather than just being the operators of them? So we'll start with Lisa.
Sorry. Swear you're going to start with me first.
Okay, we'll start with
Um,
Vanessa. We'll go to Vanessa.
Whatever you guys want, I can
We'll
go
get
if you
you're up,
want.
Vanessa.
Well, well, for me, it's really being open to all the changes, right? I mean, it's so hard for academia to keep up with the changes. Like, it's
Hmm.
just so hard. They're just happening. It's even harder for, probably Airbus and Boeing to keep up with the changes because, again, we have regulations. We can't just,
Right.
FAA can't just come up and, like, all right, we have four flight now. Let's test four flight in 91.256, right? It's just not going to work that way, right? So that is one thing, but it really being open, and almost want to say that technology teaches you how to use it. It's almost, I want to say, to the point where it's dumbed down, where it's like,
Hmm.
okay, it tells you click here, do this. Sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes it does get complicated, but I feel like for the most part, even if you never used ForeFlight before, you know,
Hmm.
somebody can show you the chart, right? And then we have that connection between the old chart and the new chart, and it's brought in there. Except now you can kind of click on that airport, and it'll give you all this information that before you couldn't get right away. Like you couldn't click on an airport and exactly tell how long is this runway, or is it left or right? You will have to go to another document to figure that out, right? So to
Right.
me, like this technology evolves so much. And now as an instructor who sees a student, now I skipped hours of explaining to them, you need to pull the chart supplement, right? So I'm saving so much time and also getting that aviation training to almost like a higher level, I would say, because like, okay, well now it's like I skipped all this. We have time for more bigger things, for more regulations, more detailed regulations, um, more stuff on the charts to learn than like actually showing them how to go back and forth between charts and a map and this and this and this and this, right? So to
Hmm.
me, like all this kind of involved being open to changes. Some people are not, right? I also have like older students who are just they're not open. They're not open to it. They're like, what? I don't need my iPad today. I'm like, I feel like you don't need it, but we kind of would like to have it on board. But then I have the younger students come in with phone, two iPads, charger, an extra ADS-B. Like we don't have that in our airplane now. They all have traffic
Right.
and weather radars, like right. Especially in my school, we fly the brand new DA40s, DA42s, completely equipped with everything, right? So, there's that little gap that we have to kind of fix, the generation that's
Hmm.
right now to be more open to the new technology, I feel like. But other
Yeah.
than that, I feel like it is going pretty well.
What about you, Lisa? Are you ready?
I am, yes. Thanks, Vanessa, for helping me stall a little bit. I think my answer to this is actually looking towards maybe in the opposite direction of that technical factor and having maybe a little bit more exposure and training in soft skills,
Hmm.
whether that is being a better communicator, understanding how to work with different people and personality types, broadening your emotional intelligence and
Hmm.
empathy. I think these are all definitely skills that are difficult to teach, but certainly have a lot of value in being able to be brought into any of these situations.
Hmm. And Suzanne, same question, but with a follow up. Like, what capabilities do you think will remain uniquely human centered as this technology advances? And how do we prioritize our education and develop them in tandem?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think we have to circle back to the idea that aviation is a safety critical industry. That's number
Hmm.
one. And the risk is to be led by technology rather than to have the competency of the individual lead and the technology supporting. So it's this question of authority dynamics. Like, are we on a bit of a dangerous course where, the pilot is giving up some of their authority, some of their decision-making capability, they're offloading some of their situational awareness, which maybe works for a short term, but what happens when that technology fails? Because
Right.
historically, usually what happens is the technology hangs in there until it's so challenging a situation, and then you find an individual placed into a highly complicated situation and they're out of the loop. So
Mhm.
I just wanted to sort of bring it back that technology is not perfect. I think history and previous safety and accident records would tell us it can create significant challenges. So this authority dynamic between the person and the technology, this dynamic, I think, is really essential. And Vanessa kind of spoke to it as the idea of, digital natives versus digital immigrants, right? Like I think each of us now has lived through a process where we've seen new technologies be integrated, and younger folks who've grown up with it, they respond differently than those who have had to adapt. But this also creates challenges in opera, because we could see crew members who come from different generations in using technology, different comfort levels, and ultimately they have to have the shared mental model and understanding. So I just want to sort of preface it by saying safety always has to be first, and we have to really be careful to avoid leading with tech. And then to bring it back to your question around training and education. So I wrote another book with some co-authors around competency-based education. I'm not sure if all of you have been exposed to this, but it's kind of the idea that we use hours as a metric for learning in aviation, how many hours of training you have. And yet, as a human being, we all intuitively know that some hours can change your life and some hours you're thinking about something else, completely distracted. So while hours are a critical metric for, obviously there's cost and operational considerations that go with hours, and I'm not saying we want to do away with it, but a lot of the research, a lot of the movement in our industry is suggesting that there are better ways to assess and support people training. And it really comes down to competencies. And so really what this means is, if I'm a competent professional, I can do a job without anybody else coming in and looking over my shoulder and telling me what to do. So that's professional competence. And then one step below that is that as an industry, if we can describe sort of key metrics of what competencies are, and then we align our training systems to target competencies, not hours. So as soon as an individual can show that they're competent, they can progress to the next stage, and they're not drilling holes in the sky building hours when they already know they're already competent in an area. So if we think about evolving our sector towards competency-based education, it opens up the ability to integrate all of these different ideas to improve training. So what are digital competencies? What are soft skill competencies? Like, well, how does this actually matter in a job role? And let's make training that's targeting the development and assessment from a competency-based framework.
I love that. And so we're getting close to the end of this, but I'm going to ask you all, this is for all of you, so prepare. If you could implement one change tomorrow to better prepare the next generation of aviation professionals, not just to operate in our industry, but to lead, to transform it, to be change agents, to be those innovators, what would it be? So we will go back to Vanessa.
For me, it's really probably every voice to be heard, right? Every part of engineering to be heard, every kind of different pilot to be heard. Is really bringing everybody together and figuring out this next step, for sure.
I think for me, that answer might be continuous education, constantly providing those opportunities, but also hopefully inspiring and having that fire inside so that folks feel motivated to challenge themselves to ask the questions consistently as they grow both academically and throughout their career.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And for you, Suzanne?
I think it would be a prioritization of the concept of workforce sustainability, that we need to stop practices that are meeting short-term needs by sacrificing long-term needs. Like in Canada, for example, if a regional airline has a shortage of pilots, they may go to a flight school and hire all the instructors, which severs the training pipeline. It's not a sustainable practice. So and workforce sustainability is about the best training and the most inclusive, supporting individuals and attracting, educating, and retaining. So I think this concept that sustainability is as much about the people and the system as it is about other factors, I think is one thing that I would say would be a key priority for the future.
Okay. And last question, you can take as long as you need to. For someone who's passionate about aviation, but they don't see someone from their background in leadership positions, how do they position themselves to not just enter the industry, but be a part of reshaping it? And if they're experiencing challenges or barriers, what advice do you have for them? And back to Vanessa.
Yeah, I mean, I was exactly that person. I am also come from an immigrant family. Actually, I was only raised by my mother with three daughters. She's a cleaning lady. Obviously, finances was not there. She's also not educated, and she doesn't even speak English barely. So all of those challenges I met like pretty hard on. But it's really about never giving up and being resourceful, right? I have
Mhm.
obviously nobody in aviation. I've never heard. I'm from Serbia, a very small country. There's not a lot of aviation going on there, right? But it's
Mhm.
really using your resources. My first contact with something about aviation was a through a Facebook car group that somebody had a photo of being a pilot, like he was wearing a pilot outfit. I was like, "Hey, can you tell me?" This is what I did. I literally wrote him. Can you tell me where do I start? What schools? First time I heard about Part 61 and 141, right?
Mhm.
That was literally what I did. That was the first baby step that I took to like figure out how do I get in this industry. No idea. I went to college in New York City. There's no aviation there in New York City. It's a city, right?
Mhm.
So that was really my first step, and it's hard, right? It's really about being determined. Use any resources, even if it's really wild. Just use it. Us in aviation, I feel like we're all so open to talk about it and help
Mhm.
anybody and everybody who even says A, and we're like, oh, aviation, let's talk about it, right? So I feel like, yeah, just really big persevering through that, really, yeah.
Mhm. Suzanne?
I would sort of give you the same advice I give my kids. I have teenagers, and I say like just pay attention to what lights you up inside, right? Like what is it that what chapter of the book do you flip to first, and like what are you passionate about and what excites you, and you need to lean into that and be very aware of it. And I think that it is a big challenge to look ahead and see maybe people who don't look like you as mentors. But I taught a lot of students, and I think there are leaders out there who represent pretty much every demographic you can imagine. And
Mhm.
I think that that's true. Is that the ones who are successful is they have that spark inside of them. The other thing I think is really critical is the idea that don't look at the person who's at the end of their career and think that it was a straight line. Having a long-term successful career is more about a series of failures, but picking
Mhm.
yourself back up and figuring it out and pivoting. So I used to think I only wanted to be a pilot. Like if you told my 17-year-old self you're going to be a professor, I'm like, that sounds horrifying. Like why would anybody ever choose that? But it's you just keep building one step ahead of the other. And when you sort of opens up a new door, that don't give up the work you've done, but see how you can pivot, maybe a slightly different direction and keep moving forward. But more than anything, just know yourself, know what fuels you and what excites you, and try to create a career that fuels that passion.
I love that. And Lisa?
Suzanne, that's wonderful. I absolutely agree. I think sometimes careers are not just ladders. Maybe it's more of a jungle gym. Sometimes you're going
Mhm.
this other direction and you're looking back. And so things that I agree are not necessarily linear. For me, I'd say the big piece of advice is seeking out mentorship. And for all of our professionals here, looking to be that mentor as well too. I
Yes.
definitely would not have gotten where I am today without all of the sounding boards, advice, all the women and men who have helped in uplifting me. And so it's an exciting world. There's a lot to offer. And it's hopefully going to be really, really fruitful. But yeah, finding someone out there that you can get advice from, that you can ask
Mhm.
questions, and that can hopefully help inspire you as well too.
These are wonderful nuggets of wisdom. I love all of them. And just to kind of jump on what you were talking about, Lisa, the mentorship piece is huge. I have yet, and maybe very, very rare, if ever, have found that people don't want to help other people in this industry. So if you are listening out there and watching, and there's somebody that you even think that you want to reach out to for mentorship, just ask. All of us are on LinkedIn, and I know all of us love mentoring. It is a passion for everyone because we like Vanessa said, we're just so excited to talk about Big A aviation. So don't hesitate to ask. So Suzanne, Vanessa, and Lisa, thank you so much for this rich discussion about reimagining how we're going to prepare the next generation of aviation professionals. And what's clear is that we're not just talking about adding new courses or programs or technologies. We're fundamentally rethinking what it means to prepare someone to lead, to innovate, and to thrive in this rapidly evolving industry. The future of education isn't just about producing technically competent operators, it's about developing professionals. And this evolution in aviation education is essential, not just for the individual careers, but for an industry that must innovate to meet the challenges ahead. Thank you to each of you for being part of reimagining how we prepare aviation's future leaders and innovators. And I hope everybody enjoyed this panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. Take care, everybody.